Right.
Keep in mind, everybody, we are going to record this meeting, so if you don't want to be recorded, don't say anything. Welcome to the OWASP Austin chapter July 2020 meeting. Put on by, well, Zoom and us. Here's some of the chapter leadership. I'm Kyle Smith, the chapter leader. We have Kate Brew online here too. She's the speaker coordinator. She got our great speaker who will come up later, Garrett. We have Matt Pardo, education coordinator. Tian Chandler, sponsor. Ryan Murphy, PR marketing is Ryan Murphy. And then Paul Griffiths is the membership coordinator. Advisory board is David Hughes, James Wickett, Josh Sokol, and Bankum Tanajana. I will say we are looking for some new chapter leadership. If anybody's interested, especially for the membership coordinator, Griff has decided to step aside soon. I think we will need somebody to step in on membership coordinator, and it should be a fairly straightforward position. Your name will be on this slide deck at least 2 or 3 times. CPEs, if you attend this and you ask us, send an email to myself. We will give you a CPE form if you need to submit it for any particular certification. Support OWASP. There's leadership opportunities, like I just said earlier, and there's also speaking opportunities. Fortunately, not as many this year because Kate has done such a great job of filling the slots, so we don't have as many speaker opportunities. We're always getting ready for 2021, and hopefully LastCon will come up next year also, so there'll be speaker opportunities there too. Amazon, we have the Smile. You can look up OWASP, and you can do a Smile donation to them. And of course, OWASP itself is a 501c3 organization, so it's tax deductible any donation you make to them. And most organizations have matching if you want to try to do that also. OWASP membership, yes, there is a membership. Everything is free though in OWASP. Any of our documentation and projects that they have are out there. That information is free, but you can become a member if you want to support OWASP. It's $50 per year. You can see the prices there, and there is a student discount rate if you're a student. Anything can be sent to. Look at that. There's Griff. You can just send it to Griff at owasp.org, and he'll get you some information regarding that. And I will say there are other perks that OWASP membership is doing, which I will tell you all one that I just found about last week. They sent out a message to all the current members of OWASP saying, hey, register here, and then you might win a Black Hat briefings pass, which apparently I won. I was kind of surprised, and it's about a $1,000 benefit, so that was pretty cool. So I'll be able to go to Black Hat briefings next week. It was a random drawing, so it's pretty cool. We have many ways we try to keep in contact with everybody. Hopefully you all have found these out. If you want to keep in contact, there's the Google Groups. There's a link to join on austin@owasp.org. You can find that out, and you can subscribe using a Gmail address or any other email address, and we'll get you information. It's a very quiet list. Let's put it that way, so don't worry about getting lots of spam. It's really about the announcements from the chapter. There is also Slack channels, anywhere from OWASP Austin at Slack, which we don't have a pretty URL, but you can find that URL if you all want to do that. OWASP itself has a Slack channel, which there is a chapter Austin in it. And there is a LastCon Slack too, but we're still trying to get that URL straightened out.
I'll post a link for the Slack in the chat.
That works too. Thank you very much, Josh. We are now in Meetup. We've been in Meetup for 2 months now. I think a bunch of y'all may have come from there, which is great. We're trying to get that up. We had 58 members when I took this picture. I think this was last month. So we have more members now, but it's great. Now you can find all the chapters in OWASP under the overall OWASP Foundation. You can see they have 177 groups. So fortunately, with everything being virtual nowadays, you can find other chapters if you want to attend. There's OWASP Dallas, OWASP Houston, but there's also just nationwide and actually international if you're at all interested in anything else. We have a LinkedIn group. It's really quiet. I have talked to people about sending jobs over to there if they're at all interested. If you want to follow up with that, if you have any job postings, that'd be a good place to do it. And actually, in both of our Slack channel for Austin OWASP, we actually do have a jobs channel in there too. All of our information, the videos and things like that, depending on when you look at it, it can either be on YouTube, which I think I've moved a bunch of stuff in the past year, but not everything. Or we have an older Vimeo channel too, which is archives at least go to August 2018. And then if you look at the austinowas.org site, there's a previous events tab, which has some Zoom links. Those are the ones I'm trying to get changed over to YouTube, just because, well, Zoom is owned by it's a foundation thing, and we're not sure how long our retention period is for those. So eventually those will show up over there. But there's a lot of stuff in YouTube. You can find this stuff. Study group still is occurring. Matt Pardo is still leading that with a lot of things. They were looking at the badge game for LastCon, but unfortunately with LastCon being canceled for the year, I'm not sure what exactly they're working on anymore. Do you have any info, Josh?
No, I haven't made it to the study group the past few times. They were doing hack the box challenges, and I imagine that's kind of what still is going on in the group.
Josh, I can answer that question, Josh. We are doing the
Yes.
Try Hack Me.
Yeah.
Okay, sweet. So yeah, please, if you go join the Austin OWASP, you see that Austin OWASP Slack channel, there is a study group. If you have any questions, you can ask there. And those guys, obviously, both Josh, Matt, and I can't see who was talking a second ago. But those are okay. Yeah, we all want to help each other, so you can find that information there. Unfortunately, like I said, LastCon 2020 is canceled, so we're still supporting everything we can there. But at the same point, we decided that wasn't such a great idea to be unsocially distanced, and so. And unfortunately, another unsocially distancing is the happy hour. August 13th was supposed to be the next happy hour at Brass Tap, but due to how everything is, we're still not going to have it. And I may be dropping the screen in general because we may not be doing it for the rest of the year, but we will see as things turn around, hopefully. And there's what I forgot to do. I knew there was something I meant to do on this presentation. There is a lot of other chapters that are going on. Another chapter of information. So there's a calendar at austinissa.org. They used to have a really good calendar, and apparently I didn't fill it in here. But there's AHA, which is usually this week. ISC Squared is typically, I think, the second or third Monday. Cloud Austin is via Meetup. You can find that one. It's like a Tuesday in the month. ISSA is like mid-month Wednesday. I'm not sure when ACP is, but it's also all these things are on the calendar. So if you're at all curious on those, you can look there. And I do know I'm not part of HuSecCon, but I was I need to fix that. But it was originally for May. It's been postponed, and they still on their website don't really have any information. Besides, Austin was going to be, I believe, March, but it has been postponed until December. It is still up and everything. I'm not sure if they're doing CFPs. Unfortunately, Matt Pardo is running most of it, and he would have all this information. Unfortunately, he's not here, so I can't really help to fill in that gap. But if you want anything, you can go look up Austin B-Sides. It's really great. One thing we've kind of dropped in the past few months with the Zooms is job opportunities. I want to give time to if anybody has any jobs they'd like to announce here that are available or seeking jobs. Just unmute yourself and feel free to go ahead.
This is Patrick McMahon at Bright Health. We are hiring a security engineer. You can find more information at brighthealthplan.com.
Thank you, Patrick. So Bright Health. I'm assuming it's remote and all that stuff, or is it just local here in Austin?
It's an Austin job.
Anybody else? No? Alrighty. We'll try to get these things back up. So obviously I said earlier we have speaking opportunities. Contact Kate Brew. She's a great person to do this, and heck, just contact Kate anyways about any social networking stuff. She'll pull for things too if you need it.
You bet.
And this is always the fun part. Garrett, every time I looked up your name, I found the MMA guy.
It's an older picture. It's I don't work out as much.
He doesn't work out as much anymore, so yeah. He's got the beard going, the glasses.
Right.
So this is Garrett Gross from an MMA. So
this guy is great for my OppSec. He is all over the internet.
oh yes. This guy, not so much. Even though I have found a few places of him. There's like you said earlier, he's into the drums. So there was a picture I found of him, a bunch of the cymbals. I tried to get a funny YouTube position, but that was the best one I could get. The presenting one. Garrett is a great guy. He's rapid. You're still Rapid 7, right? Everything's yeah. And you can go look on YouTube. He's got some great OWASP top 10 informational stuff in there, along with a whole bunch of other Rapid 7 items, among other things. And Garrett is going to talk about the Spice Must Flow AppSec for DevOps. I'll see if I can pass over to him here.
Howdy, folks. Thanks so much for having me. Let's get my screen shared, and I'm really bad at multitasking. I've found out. I can do usually one thing decently well, but hopefully everyone can see the correct screen. Awesome. So yeah, this talk won't be about Dune at all. I'm a huge Dune fan. We kind of nerded out about Dune for 10 minutes prior to this meeting, but this is literally an excuse just to have the screenshot up. But now it is a reminder that the movie is delayed, so shame on me. About me, that's me. That's my big face. I've had a lot of different jobs. My first job was working in a video store, but after that, I got a job as a network engineer right when Las Vegas was starting to network all the things around 1998. So that tells you how old I am. Had a lot of jobs, got a wonderful opportunity to work with Kate Brew for a couple years. Good friend of mine. Currently work with Matt Pardo. That's my name dropping. It's my celebrities that I know. I'm currently the technical advisor at Rapid7 for application security. So being a former user, I'm kind of like a user evangelist. I'm a cross-functional kind of, glue within the product and engineering departments. A couple of fun facts. I love to ride my bicycle, which is interesting for me to say because I've been sedentary for the past, 15 years. And I took COVID as an opportunity to try and undo some of the damage that I've done. So I've been riding my bike all the time. I love it. And I have auditioned for the Blue Man Group. We'll leave it at that. A couple of thanks before we get started. I just want to thank OWASP for having me. Thanks, Kate Brew, for reaching out and asking me to speak. Again, Kate Brew is a great person. You should just contact Kate Brew. Not about anything specific. Just contact her. She's great. And then, of course, Alan Turing and Prince Rogers Nelson for existing. Some of the things that we're going to talk about today, I'm anticipating running out of time. So if I'm hurrying through stuff, I apologize. But I want to talk about where we're at today with AppSec. I don't make any assumptions about who I'm talking to or what you know about application security. So some of this may be not new information. We're going to go into what I consider the evolution of your Infosec or maybe your AppSec maturity. Talk about how you can work with the software development lifecycle. And then I'll introduce my totally not revolutionary or new, just kind of back to basics concept of test, monitor, and prevent. So first and foremost, the state of AppSec. Well, it's still bad. It's been bad for quite some time. And the Cliff's Notes is that we're screwed. No, AppSec still gets a lot of press, which is, kind of a sick, twisted way, I guess, good for us. But the fact of the matter is our applications are still the top attack vector. I mean, you can see the stats on the screen. In the latest DBER, which if you don't read the Verizon Data Breach Investigation Report, you certainly should. Even if it's just the executive summary, it's a great, very easy read. Of about almost 1,400 breaches that they studied, 45% involved hacking. Duh. Okay, that's actually kind of low, but all right. But of the same sample set, 42% of the breaches that were studied involved web applications. So that tells you that over 90% of all breaches that involved any kind of hacking, over 90% involved web apps. And that should be no surprise to anyone who works in AppSec. But what is pretty interesting is that SQLi made the list. So SQL injection, as you can see, is its own category now in the top hacking varieties, which to anyone who works in AppSec should blow you away. SQL injection being arguably the most researched attack vector in AppSec. Thank you, Rainforest Puppy. It's just kind of bizarre to me that that's still what gets exploited. But then I start thinking about it, and then of course it makes sense because of the kind of predicament that we're in as security professionals. And also, I don't make any assumptions that I'm not talking to some developers in the crowd. So if I crack any jokes at your expense, sorry, I'm not sorry. So let's talk about shifting left and how I think it's kind of the most tired and overused battle cry from our AppSec vendors ever. But before I do that, I don't want to give anyone the impression that I think that being proactive is a bad idea, because I'm not saying that at all. You'll get what I'm saying about shifting left here in a second. But being proactive in identifying these vulnerabilities and remediating them is not only just, good for you as reducing risk across your environment, but it's good for the business. This is a pretty simplified version of a lot of different studies that have been done that try to show the effort required in fixing vulnerabilities. And you can see, you won't be able to see my screen, I don't think, or maybe you will. That kind of exponential curve that goes up at the end here, that is the cost of fixing these issues amongst the different phases of your software development lifecycle. So what this means is, and you may say, oh, that's dramatic and definitely marketing. It's not. It's actually backed by real numbers. And I think it's something like a factor of 1600x is what it's going to cost once once a vulnerability reaches production, just due to, obviously down services, so loss of revenue, customer confidence, regulatory fines, you might get sued. And anyone who's unfortunately been in the position, myself included, of having to work a breach, knows that it gets very expensive very quickly, and expensive in ways you had no idea. So again, not to beat this into submission, but being proactive is obviously a very good thing. However, this notion of shifting left, so we've got some comments coming in already. Excellent. Yeah, Kyle, I agree. This notion of shifting left, I think, is kind of tired. You have this perceived fantasy of, security and DevOps working in harmony, when actually it's usually us just shoveling their shit at the end of it. And it's unfortunate because when you ask both sides, they often have two very different perceptions of whose responsibility security is. And this is a study that we did, I believe. 40% of developers say that they don't have enough time for security. Like, taken out of context, that seems kind of flippant and kind of snarky. But if you think about it, again, I'm not a developer, and I'll probably say this several times throughout the presentation. I've written tons of code, but I'm no way a developer. I've never been a developer in my life. But I understand that, there are a lot of factors that go into fixing a vulnerability. And when you're motivated by the speed at which you can release code, that extra time that you're saddled with, especially fixing things, it doesn't make sense in today's business. Imagine having to wait 300 days before you could release a feature. It's just maddening. So all gravitas and joking aside, Sneak, who produces a great product, it's free. So I'm not a paid endorser. I suppose I'm a non-paid endorser at this point, but Sneak provides open source or an intelligence on open source packages. And they do a lot of research. It's awesome. They did a study in mid-2019 that surveyed a bunch of people asking who is responsible for security. And it was a multiple choice question. But as you can see, 81% of respondents said that developers were responsible for security. But wait, developers, if you ask them, they say that they don't have time for security. So you can kind of see this push-pull contentious relationship that's kind of built into our industry, which is unfortunate. You've got us, or I'll just say me in the security field advocating for reduction of risk, and then you've got folks in the DevOps field trying to accelerate the speed at which you release these things. So naturally they're going to clash, but what's the answer? The answer is I don't know. It's going to be case specific, and that's the end of my presentation. No, I'm kidding. Once you kind of find yourself bought in, either you've made the decision or your organization has made the decision, you've got so much money that you can't even keep it all in your pockets. You've got so many talented people on your team. You've got everything stacked in your favor, and you've decided that you want to take some sort of leap into application security. This is where you start. Oh wait, sorry, that's just overall Infosec, which if you think that doesn't relate to AppSec, application security, you are gravely mistaken. But let's boil it down to just the application security vendors out there. And I'm sure a lot of you work for some vendors that are up there. I know I do. Rapid7's up there a couple times. It's maddening. I mean, even if you know that you need to do this and you've got everyone agreed into the notion that you need to do this, and even if you've decided to take a certain approach, finding the right vendor or finding the right partner or finding the right combination or stack or whatever, it's unbelievably frustrating. It's confusing, and oftentimes that vendor tries to maybe force their way of doing business on you. Like, you know, you need to buy everything in our ecosystem. And it's not just security or IT. I mean, we talked about playing music earlier. You know, there are recording devices that use effects that, you know, you have to purchase through them. So it's not, you know, specific to IT, but you can, you know, very quickly get locked into someone else's way of thinking if you don't yourself know what you're doing. So I like to look at it as more of an evolution. It's not who's doing it right and who's doing it wrong. And, oh, you know, Kate down here in a startup versus Garrett up here working for a huge financial, and, you know, poor Kate, she just doesn't know what she's doing. It's not that at all. I believe it's truly an evolution, because you're going to find yourself, I mean, there might be folks who work at the same company for 40 years. I'm not one of them, but I might find myself in my next position with a vastly different budget and, you know, human resources at my disposal to get the same kind of job done. So again, I don't want to paint the picture that I'm advocating that anyone's doing anything wrong. It's just more of a different place in your journey. And which brings me to my most hated quote: "Life is a journey, not a destination." Ralph Waldo Emerson didn't actually say that, just FYI. What Ralph, if you're a literature buff, which I'm not, I had to look this up. What he said was, to finish the moment, to find the journey's end in every step of the road, to live the greatest number of good hours is wisdom. I don't even know what that means, but it has nothing to do with security. What this has to do, and the reason I'm bringing it up, is that you're never going to reach this state of, well, we got all the security done, pack it up, it's time to go home. It's a constant evolution. So, you know, much like music or learning any kind of craft, I think there's always something to learn. So that's my little soapbox there. When we start to look at this evolution, I like to map it out on a timeline. And I didn't really add all the labels that I wanted to, but I thought it was going to get way too confusing real quick. But you can think of this as, on the left, you have more of a reactive approach, and on the right, you have a more proactive approach. And again, your resources available, the folks that you're working with are going to dictate how you can respond to things. But on the top, you have more of the security, general security approach. And on the bottom, I have listed the approaches of how you would work with your development teams. And I'll go into what each of those mean. But broadly, you can kind of map this out to three general aspirations on the timeline that you're in. In a reactive state, you just want to know what's out there. What apps are out there? What's critical? What is risk? I just need to be made aware of these things. I don't necessarily need to push the envelope, which we'll go into, but I just want to know what's out there and have visibility into my attack surface. When you get to the more the middle of the road, what I've called maybe the compliance driven, it's not everyone that's, running PCI and HIPAA. It's just, that's kind of your guidepost that you use as your compliance standards. But you're looking to establish repeatable processes that reduce risk and therefore demonstrate compliance if you're held to those standards. And then on a very proactive stance, you're looking to push the envelope. You've embraced security in all areas of your organization, and you're looking for ways that you can embrace security more. So again, just kind of laying some groundwork of what I'm about to talk about. So when I think of the Infosec maturity model, first off, we can talk about the reactive side in the context of blocking and tackling. You don't have anyone really rooting for you or funneling you with a bunch of cash. Therefore, you can't hire anyone. You're not setting your own metrics to report on yourself. Therefore, you're pretty much set up for failure. You don't know what you're doing. You don't know that you're doing the wrong thing. So you're left kind of responding to things in a very tactical fashion. And as we all know, or maybe some of you don't yet, stuff's going to fall through the cracks. And it's more of a process of managing who's going to be the most upset. It's kind of like, just product management, but applied to general security. If we look at the middle of the road compliance driven, kind of what I talked about, it's more of a control-based security approach. You've actually, you've identified, risk, maybe you've mapped out risk, and you've deployed either processes or point solutions to address these risks. You're starting to align to these regulatory compliance standards, whether that's meeting them or you're, in that journey to, demonstrating the path to compliance. If there is, and again, these are just attributes to kind of look out for to maybe understand which position you might be in. But maybe your security expertise is concentrated towards the top. Maybe you're new to the team and all of your other teammates are, and your manager or director is the one with tenure. Or maybe you're the manager or director and you only have budget to hire, newer folks that are coming out of college or just have lack of experience. And this can be seen as kind of checking the box. I meant to put a question mark at the end of that, but sometimes it's just the predicament that you're in. You're having to kind of tread water and you got a lot of plates spinning. And while there are a lot of plates spinning, they're not falling yet. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have the risk-based approach. It's a multi-layered security stack, probably a bunch of the same types of tools from different vendors. You're leveraging risk-based analytics rather than, some kind of quantification of how many tickets come in or something. You're actually demonstrating a reduction of risk. You're using things like behavioral analytics to feed into all areas of security. And, as I inferred earlier, you're trying to push the envelope. You're trying to understand, or you've established your way of doing security. You're trying to understand, is that the right way? And is there a better way to do it out there? And then you're really doubling down on correlation. You're taking feeds from all different sources and trying to make sense of it all. When we apply this to the AppSec maturity model, it's much different. I mean, it's a lot of parallels, but you see things like this adversarial relationship of the security versus your engineering team. Security is definitely going to be initiated and curated by you. Dev is not going to ask you to run scans on their apps. And, chances are, my experience is at least, it's very contentious. And I, would have to fight for the ability to get access to these applications in pre-production, or if I was just scanning them in production, fighting to get folks' attention to even, look at the results that I was spending arguably a lot of time on. You're seen as a necessary evil. This is kind of the Department of No. That's at least where, where I got it from. No, you cannot do this. No, you can't do that. And it's always a case of just misunderstanding the other side and perception issue. And, in this instrumentation, your assessment is actually going to introduce a bottleneck, either indirectly or directly. But if you are doing the classic, I'm going to scan your application in production and then give you a list of stuff to fix, well, you're impacting their ability to progress forward. And chances are they're just working around you anyway. Which brings me to my next point. A lot of infighting. My experience was a lot of just poking holes in the tools, and rather than taking the information and doing something about it, spending a lot of time figuring out why this wasn't the right tool. And, again, it's just wasted time when the basis of this is mistrust. You're not really trusting each other that you have the same goals in mind. Because again, not to get on a tangent, but on the surface, it does kind of seem like you're headed in different directions if I'm telling you that you need to slow down your release cycle. But as we all know, if you get it right, it actually can accelerate that cycle. And then there's little to no AppSec experience on the Infosec team. And this is not a slam on anyone. I came from the network engineering side and then went to network security and then went to application security. So you might just find yourself in that predicament to where you're having to figure it out and, make it up as you go along. Then you get into secure development where you've definitely gotten buy-in from the dev team. You've started instrumenting your controls into the stack. Maybe you've got them to run, and again, I'm not a developer. Maybe you've got them to run SAS scans ad hoc. Maybe you're running DAS scans in their release tools, but you're not blocking any kind of release cycle. And then this is when you start to see these two groups coalesce. You're working together to solve these issues. You're not just passing it over and then leaving a bunch of room for speculation. You're either meeting, with each other and coming up with these paths to resolution together, or there's some sort of built-in workflow process. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have DevOps or DevSecOps. Definitely not OPSEC Dev. That's where security is fully baked into your software development lifecycle. You're leveraging things like runtime application self-protection, advanced threat modeling. You're doing things like automated correlation of findings, where you're just bringing everything together to something like, I don't want to name a vendor, but something like an automated correlation and aggregation engine, and then doing something about it, in an automated fashion. Like, we'll talk about submitting pull requests and stuff on behalf of, bunk packages that you found. So really, really taking action. So again, this is just meant as a kind of a guidepost of where you might find yourself. And this is 3 categories. This is definitely won't identify everyone, but just, again, some common attributes to look for. And then the other dynamic that we're not really talking about here is money. And why do I have money up here? I've tried to find like a funny money gif, but they're all really depressing, to be quite honest. You can have all the intention. It's kind of like this exercise I brought up earlier, but a kind of a different spin. You could have all the best intentions in the world. You could have all the AppSec expertise on the planet. And you could have everyone with a technical bone in their body aligned and in agreement that this is what we need to do about this certain situation. But if you haven't demonstrated what the financial impact is on your organization on doing this, then it won't happen. And anyone who's ever had to work a job, work a job in security probably understands that. It usually comes down to money. It's as unfortunate as it is. You're going to find yourself money, and therefore your ability to spend that money and hire people or purchase solutions or work with managed partners, whatever, that's going to dictate kind of where you're at. So again, just as a reiteration of, we're all going to be at different stages of this evolution, and it's very important to consider what your financial impact is going to be, because it's not always the right decision to go deploy best in breed tools and hire some AppSec experts. Sometimes you just got to deploy a bunch of open source tools and figure it out in the way. So with that, talk about how I see AppSec augmenting the software development lifecycle. Traditionally, it's a gated type experience, and I blatantly stole this slide from my friend Alyssa, who is an awesome presenter. Works at Sneak. So Alyssa, if you see this recording later, thank you for your slide. But it's a great elucidation of this, because it shows you that your traditional approach is that you want to stop this process to do your assessments. Threat modeling, that's a real big one. Like you want to inject yourself in the development of these user stories, and these personality profiles are going to be using this application, and therefore start to explore how abuse would take place. But if you're interrupting that process, again, it's going to end up in some sort of a fragmented type project, and also, cause you to waste a bunch of time. If you're running static code analysis or software composition analysis in between where you wrote code and where you send it to build, again, it's going to end up in a fragmented process, because chances are those teams might move on to something else. That's the unfortunate reality. They might move on to dev, work on something else, and then you have your assessment done, and then it's time for them to get, again, it's not conducive to their processes, and generally is not going to help you align to, or help them align to what you feel is most conducive to the organization in regards to security, which is integrating yourself as part of this process. In the case of threat modeling, you're working with these teams instead of providing an assessment of what they've produced. In SAST and DAST scanning, these things are integrated as part of the process. So it's still the same, technically the same thing that you're doing. It's just you've built in more of an expectation that this is now part of it. And also you've usually broken it down into, digestible chunks. In the case of like DAST scanning, instead of, like I said, running this, complete scan on the entire app and then saying dev fix these, 4,000 things, you're running at the time of deploy. So maybe you're integrating with a build automation software, and when they when the developer sends the app to build or deploy, it's going to run a DAS scan, give them results, and they might have 10 vulns that they found. That gives them a chance to have a digestible amount of things to fix. They fix that, they move on, and again, it's more of an expectation that this is going to happen rather than an interruption. And as in most things, the perception that you put out there is going to have a really big effect on the response that you get from that person. And so it sounds kind of cliche in marketing, but I just loved it so much. Frictionless enablement. You really are trying to meld yourself in as part of this process. So what my solution or what I'll posit is that no matter where you are on this evolution, how much money you have at your disposal, what your aspirations for AppSec are, you can apply the concepts of test, monitor, prevent. And this is new. People have probably said this before, but it is kind of a back to basics assessment of finding the flaws in your application, understanding how your applications are being attacked, ideally in real time. We don't always have the ability to do that, and we'll get into that here in a minute. But at least have the opportunity to forensically see how your applications are being attacked. And then take this information and use it to reduce risk by either mitigating or remediating the flaws. And, two different approaches. And again, it's going to heavily depend on where you're at on that evolution. But again, the reduction of risk is kind of what we're looking for, because prevention is not in any way saying that you're going to stop all the attacks, because I don't think that's possible. I think there are folks out there that do believe that that's possible. You can get pretty close. But again, I think to me, prevention means reducing a risk to an acceptable level that's been agreed upon by, everyone who kind of has a stake in the security game of your organization. So how do I apply this in practice? Again, my safe harbor, not a developer. So I'm probably going to get some of this wrong. And I hope I do, honestly, I hope I do. And I hope someone corrects me and says, actually, as a developer, this is the way I would look at it, because much to the point of this entire talk, I think that's what's going to make us better, is reaching across the aisle, if you will, to use some contemporary parlance. So I kind of put a bunch of stuff up on the screen, jumbled it up into one slide. Sorry, kind of. But you can draw parallels, and a lot of these kind of map to one another. So when you find yourself in this reactive end of the spectrum, you're blocking and tackling, you're kind of up against your development department, or maybe you're up against your security department, depending on who you are. Some of the things you can do in the testing phase is just get an idea of where you're at. Get a manual pen test done, run a DAS scan. Either you do this or you have someone else do this. At this end of the spectrum, I felt like plastering this across the entire slide, but really consider a managed partner at this time. A lot of managed partners will help you build a path to self-sustainability. So it doesn't necessarily lock you into that type of interplay with a vendor, and it can get you to where you need to be. I've been very successful in the past by offloading some work to managed service providers. Also in this testing phase, you're starting to have joint review between you and the dev department, either setting up meetings specifically for this, or joining the development or the developers meetings, or as a developer joining securities meetings, getting used to that nomenclature and starting to build that trust and understand that, we may speak a different language and we have different aspirations, but we can come together in kind of a common goal. and then have some kind of a regular code review. I don't know if that's a ad hoc run of a SAST across the code base of a certain section or what, but at least again, you're trying to get a baseline understanding of where you're at today. In regards to monitoring, application discovery, and I'm not talking about a tool that you have to go buy to do this. I'm talking about running Nmap and listing out all the IPs that are listening on the 80 and 443, and then going and chasing those down to really understand what your true risk is. And I obviously wouldn't name names or even get close to, but the amount of folks that I run into that have no idea the amount of shadow applications that are out there blows my mind. And that's, to me, coming from the network side, a very easy win to come in and assess and understand where you're at in regards to what apps are out there. Because if you don't know what's out there, obviously you can't secure them. Duh. On the kind of, dev side, working with dev, HTTP traffic inspection. You can do this with a WAF. You can do it manually, tail the web server, running DAS scans following a deployment, and just providing them the information. You're not necessarily asking them to do anything. You're not even interrupting the process. You're just running it in concert and then making that information available. Again, getting everyone familiar with the parlance, the nomenclature that we share, goes a long way. And then on the prevention side, this is, again, related to what we said earlier, providing dev with these remediation plans and then kind of patching in concert. I mean, obviously we still have the ability to affect direct change without having to, interrupt the dev, department directly, and we can do a lot through patching. And then, this is where I'm kind of probably going to get in trouble and stepping outside what I even is appropriate for me to say, but this is where you start to introduce things like security awareness and secure coding training. I'd be the last person to tell, a development department, hey, you need to get better or whatever, but you kind of build on this shared responsibility, and these things tend to kind of come naturally, especially if it's, an edict from on high. Security awareness can be mandated, and then secure code training can kind of be folded into that process. And then, blocking attacks, really low level known stuff via the WAF is also a very quick win, especially if you're kind of waiting for development to fix these issues. I think we're doing good on time. Got a couple more slides to go. This middle of the road, these are some things that you can take action on. Testing, again, you're doing regular assessments. Now you're doing your own penetration tests, or you're hiring a firm to do these on a regular basis, maybe even black box penetration tests. You're running DAS scans on a regular basis and then providing those results to the dev department. You're even doing mock audits. This can be all the way from having a vendor with reports that map to PCI or HIPAA, all the way to actually going through a full-blown mock audit. And if you're serious about attaining regulatory compliance, that might be an option for you. On the dev side, you're now seeing SAST integrated with the SDLC. There is no question of how you're doing it. It's in the IDE. You're running regular code reviews. You might have DAST integrated into your build or deploy tools in a report only mode, but now the developer is starting to initiate these scans. They're seeing that when they submit this build, they're also, running a scan, and they'll have access to those results. And this is where you're also running software composition analysis. I could spend an hour on that, and Alyssa could probably spend like 14, but in modern days that we're writing 80 lines of code and dependent on 100 libraries, SCA is very important. And again, not doing that can be a fatal flaw if your development strategy involves the use of a bunch of third-party stuff. Monitoring, again, application discovery. Maybe this is a little bit more aggressive. Maybe this is taking data from your existing network layer tools and automating the propagation of DAS scans or something like that. You have these scans that are run, reported on, and then mapped to your regulatory compliance standards. And then you probably have like a WAF deployed, or you could deploy a WAF or something like this. In line with the whole compliance bent. On the dev side, even, you're reporting with these risk reduction metrics. So you're now giving them these findings from your DAS scans or your pen tests in the confines of reducing risk. So you're showing them, are you trending up, or are you trending down? On the prevention side, this is where you can start to identify specific IPs that are attributed to malicious activity, probably via a WAF, and then block them. On the dev side, you can work with the dev team to validate these vulnerabilities, show them what this looks like in HTTP, and then help them understand how this, how you're able to pop the SQL injection, how this maps back to their, unsanitized search field or whatever. And again, this is kind of the middle of the road. This is, hey, we're all cool with security. Let's kind of show each other some cool tricks. But again, you're still wanting to build that trust, and you're still wanting to bring folks into your meetings. And even though I don't have this up on the screen, this is even more of a, if you're in the security team, to bring development into the fold. If you're in the dev or the DevOps team, bringing your security team into the fold and really trying to understand how each other is working towards a shared goal. On the final end, this proactive end, you're firing on all cylinders, but much to what I said earlier, you're always in learn mode and there's always something you can do better. Now you're doing things like manual correlation or automated correlation supported by manual validation across data sources outside of security even. I mean, you're looking at financial indicators, or if you're digging into insider threats, maybe looking into HR not records, but I'm talking about account signups and terminations. You're bringing in network layer data, app layer data, maybe even some, we talked about earlier, some UEBA stuff to identify how your users are interfacing with the application and how that correlates to the current, threat posture. At this point, your devs, they're probably in their own DevOps or DevSecOps team, and they're running their own assessments. They don't need you anymore, but really they have their own tools, and it's great because they now they're not doing your job, but they're now doing part of your greater plan, which is to reduce risk, which is great. On the monitor side, again, application discovery, but maybe this is more of a purpose-built solution or a very aggressive threat hunting or application hunting type campaign. Certainly, you could be using a WAF here and dial up the aggressiveness of what you're monitoring and alerting on. On the dev side, this is where you introduce RASP and runtime level instrumentation, IAST, things like that, to where you're now, and again, this requires a crazy level of trust because you could really bork an application, like for real. But with the runtime visibility, you get access to things like the class loader, see what packages were actually loaded in the application. You can run stack traces on events and really see what's happening. And then at the same time, you can start to block activity. You can use this runtime visibility to block commands that the application is making to the operating system. If you're using content security policy, even if the web server gets owned, you can have some CSP persistence and therefore protect your users that are addressing your application. So some really cool things that are possible once you kind of have this shared buy-in and this trust that that thing's going to work, but also we're headed towards the right direction. You start to see things like configuration management, very important, especially when we're developing in the cloud, and then automated remediation. These are things like, again, I'm obviously an unpaid endorser for Sneak, but if you have something like Sneak integrated, you find these flaws in your packages stack or whatever, and you can submit pull requests automatically. If integrated with GitHub and have this go update the packages, bounce your box, and then in a matter of minutes, you're now protected against what could have been an O-Day released earlier that morning. And then on the dev side, You've got dev-led vulnerability validation. Much to my earlier point, they're not really involving you anymore. They have the tools. They might even have security experts on their team, or there may not even be a security team at this point. It may just be one cohesive unit to where they are performing the threat modeling and they are performing the remediation, the mitigation. You're more drafting policy and making sure that it's been adhered to. And it sounds like kind of a nirvana state, but even that has its inherent challenges. So I realize I'm close to time here, so I'll kind of give my final thoughts. No matter where you're at on this evolution or who you are, how much experience you think you have or you don't have, I think that there's some really basic concepts that can kind of ground you in this journey. Understand your risk, know what's happening now and how that affects that risk, and then just take steps to reduce that risk. Because if, in my mind, if you're working for me and you've demonstrated that you understand what's happening or understand what is going to contribute to risk, what's happening now that's contributing to that risk, and what you're doing about it, you're actually heading to trend in a positive or a negative reduction of risk. I think I said that incorrectly. When it trends in a way that makes it look like you're reducing risk, that to me is proof that you're at least thinking of the right things. And again, it's just one guy's approach. Take it or leave it. I open the floor for questions, flame war, challenging me, Star Trek: The Next Generation trivia, whatever you want.
No Dune? Oh, sorry. Thanks,
Garrett,
Garrett.
Austin OWASP is the friendly chapter. There will be no torching.
Oh,
Hopefully
that's
some
fine.
nice questions.
I'm used to it.
So the floor is open for questions if anybody wants to unmute themselves and ask away. We're too busy playing our music in the background, so we just heard Garrett, and now we're thinking of drums and everything else. No one? No one?
Well, I like
I
Aaron.
have a question.
Oh, someone has a question. Excellent.
Yeah, sure. No one else is going to speak up. So you had a pretty good discussion of various, relationships between if you have like a security department, your developers and the DevOps team, optionally in that mix. It's just more of a comment than a question, but one group you might want to look at for good leverage into the development is if you have a strong QA department, particularly like software engineers and tests who are a bit more in automation levels, be a very good one if you take it as a security as a quality issue. That's how it's been leveraged at my company in a lot of aspects, and I think it's been working pretty well.
Yeah, and I agree with you. And just another bolster to my self-flagellated myopia. But you're right. You're exactly correct. QA definitely, and in fact, the next time I give this talk, I'll probably mention QA. The one thing that I would say about that is I've worked in organizations to where we don't have QA, and they instead rely on a concept of quality engineering, which, again, this just shows my lack of experience in never being a developer, but that to me just sounds like an excuse. Like, well, we just don't want to spend the time to put it through a QA process. So we've instituted our own QA checks along the way.
Yeah, we're just super shift left, right? We just
Right,
check our own code.
Right. And I didn't even get into that. Like, I've talked for hours on just the concept of shifting left, but I think it's kind of a bold assumption that you're going to say, well, I'm going to take my concepts and impose them on you. I think shifting left is just as on the table as shifting right when you have folks that are dictating the architecture that these applications are running on. So yeah, I think it's shifting everywhere.
And
Go ahead, Matthew.
Oh, thank you. Just one more question. Have you had situations you've seen where it's maybe an acquisition or joining to a company long after it's developed, and you find like some of these security issues are more architectural in nature? Where do you start with something like that? Do you look to do like more secure development, or just start imposing, the dynamic testing, DAST or SAS and stuff like that?
Man, that is a fantastic question. that really, to me, and this is the way I would approach it, you have to have kind of an honest discussion of acceptable risk in that case, because you may not have been part of the process of acquiring that company or purchasing this product or whatever you've brought into your fold that is, to your point, years, the train's left the station. Like someone made the decision to write it in C. I don't know why. Hopefully I've offended someone or not offended someone by that joke. But I would say that it's a question of acceptable risk, because you do have a lot of options here. Re-architecting and starting from a clean room build is not out of the question, but that's a pretty big step. And both Kate and I have worked for a company that made that decision to start from a completely clean room build, and it had pros and cons, and I won't go into detail, but pros and cons associated with that. But I would say that the important part here is that you have the acceptable risk discussion. You have the quantification of the risk in whatever way you decide to do that, and you prepare your assessment that says, this is where I think we are, this is what we need to do, and maybe even present some options. Because again, much to my point earlier, finance is gonna come into play, and a complete overhaul of that application is going to cost a whole lot more, obviously, than iterative features. And maybe the business just doesn't have the appetite or the budget or the forecast, or a bunch of business terms that I'm just pulling out of my hat right now, to even take that on. Maybe it's not even part of the strategy. You know what I mean? So probably a milquetoast answer, but I would say that it requires an honest conversation. These things happen all the time where you kind of inherit someone else's ugly application that was built incorrectly. But I would say that's much just the nature of AppSec, is you're almost always dealing with someone else's idea of how an application was supposed to have been built.
And Garrett, just to add to what you're saying, you can also look at building mitigating controls around that inherited system or whatever. And so that could be another alternative.
Yeah, absolutely. And the knee-jerk reaction that I think of is like wrapping an auth layer around something, or if there is some like a database technology that's super insecure that you're not using, make the decision to port that over, because there is no fixing that. It's, if you put that out there, it is going to have the inherent vulnerabilities. But yeah, I like that. Just some built-in mitigation steps that you're going to take in the event that this were to happen. That way it just happens automatically. And again, much to the point earlier, you're not surprising anyone by doing this. It's kind of built into the expectation that this would have happened.
Great discussion. Thank you, Garrett. Anyone else there? Well, once again, thank you, Garrett, for doing this. It was a good discussion, great presentation, good discussion afterwards too.
Thank you, Garrett.
Thank you again, and hope to see everybody around. Well, hope to hear everybody around next month at least, and maybe we'll be able to get together sometime sooner than later. Have a good day, y'all.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Y'all.